So good morning again, everyone. My topic today actually came out of a question that came up in our February book group. I think actually Don raised the question, if I recall correctly. Is that right, Don? And the question was, is there a difference between allowing and accepting? And so I wanted to dig into that a little bit today because I think it turned out to be an interesting topic once I went down the rabbit hole. But anyway, as you know, in this practice, in the practice of Buddhism, so much of our spiritual growth hinges on how we relate to the experiences of our lives, both the pleasant experiences and the not so pleasant experiences. And two concepts that arise in this context, the context of how we relate to these experiences, are allowing and accepting. And at first blush, when Don first raised it, I thought, well, they sound like they're pretty similar, if not the same thing. But as I dug into it, it became clear that they're pretty significantly different, at least when we view them through the lens of the Buddhist teachings. And understanding these differences really, I think, helps clarify the direction of our path, and as we sort of seek greater inner peace and reduction from suffering. So let's start with allowing. And so allowing, at least on our path, is best understood as the capacity to let experience arise, whatever it is, without trying to control it, without trying to suppress it or push it away. So it's a form of mindfulness, or an aspect of mindfulness, where we simply notice what is happening in the moment, whether that's a thought, an emotion, an interaction, a sensation, whatever. It's just noticing what is arising in the moment. And this is what's often referred to in Buddhism as bare attention, a fundamental aspect of mindfulness that the Buddha talks about in the Satipatthana Sutta. That's the famous sutta, the so-called Discourse on the Foundations of Mindfulness, where he describes the four foundations of mindfulness. And I'm not going to get into the weeds on that today because it's pretty esoteric. But this notion of bare attention comes up in the Satipatthana Sutta. Because when we allow something to happen, just arise without interference, we're not fighting against the reality of whatever is occurring. We're letting it be. For example, if I feel anger arising, allowing means simply observing the anger. I'm not labeling it as bad. I'm not labeling it as wrong. I'm not labeling it as self-righteous. I'm not trying to force it to go away. I'm just allowing it, okay? So what this is then is really a practice of non-reactive awareness. We're not reacting to it. We're just noting it. We create space between the experience of the anger and those habitual tendencies, those really default tendencies to cling, to reject, to judge, the second arrow, the whole range of things. So allowing is a form of inner permission that enables us to make contact with the truth of the moment as it is. Let me repeat that. Allowing is a form of inner permission that enables us to make contact with the truth of the moment as it is. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean a deep engagement, a resolution. It's just simply allowing. It is the initial step of creating openness to our experience. But it sometimes, and usually I would say really, lacks the depth of wholehearted embrace that true acceptance entails. Okay, it doesn't go to that step. It's just allowing it. Allowing is, the metaphor that came to mind was, allowing is like opening a door just to let the wind blow through. We're not closing the door. We're not, moving out of its way. We're just opening the door and letting the wind blow through. The wind is permitted to come and go, but we may still be a little bit on guard, or we may be still bracing ourselves against it or whatever, but we are allowing it. Now, here's where the distinction comes, and it's somewhat nuanced, but acceptance, as I dug into it, turns out to go beyond mere allowing. Okay. Because it represents a profound acknowledgement and embracing. This is a more active process. Embracing of reality as it is, without resistance or aversion. Okay. So while allowing involves permitting the experience to arise, accepting carries with it a sense of wholeheartedness, wholehearted acceptance, a willingness to be fully present with life, even when it's difficult or painful. So there's more of an action step in there, okay? You know, the Buddha taught that suffering arises from our resistance to the impermanent nature of life, everything in it. And in the Four Noble Truths, he identified craving and aversion as the root causes of our dissatisfaction. So acceptance then serves as an antidote to this resistance, okay? When we accept, we relinquish, this is the action part, we relinquish the internal struggle against what is. And in doing so, we find freedom from suffering. It's the relinquishing. For instance, if we experience grief after a loss, acceptance does not mean we suppress it. It doesn't mean we pretend it doesn't hurt. It means we allow ourselves, we accept to feel the grief fully without judgment or resistance. We stop wishing for the pain to be different. Instead, we meet it with compassion and understanding. Now, this is not resignation. This is not passivity. This is not throwing in the towel. This is an active process of opening the heart to the reality of the moment, no matter how challenging it may be. Now, of course, while there's a distinction here, at least I'm trying to draw a distinction between allowing and acceptance, they are deeply interconnected. Because allowing is the first and necessary step toward acceptance. Okay. We have to allow it before we can engage in accepting it. Before we can fully embrace an experience, we must first allow it to just show up and exist in our awareness without pushing it away. But the problem with just allowing is that it can sometimes remain superficial if it lacks the deeper intention to meet reality with openness and compassion. That's the next step. For example, if we're sitting in meditation, we may allow our thoughts to come up and just pass through without clinging to them, without pushing them away or whatever. But if we harbor a subtle aversion to these thoughts or wish them to disappear, we're not fully practicing acceptance. We allow them, but then we kind of still don't like, we kind of push them away. Acceptance takes allowing a step further, would be my argument. When we welcome the thoughts, whatever they might be, with an attitude of kindness, with an attitude of self-compassion, with equanimity, we recognize them as just a natural expression of the mind. They're not good, they're not bad, they just are what they are. And we can see the interplay between allowance and acceptance in how we approach difficult emotions. Allowing might look like acknowledging, I feel anxious right now. Right in this moment, I feel anxious. While acceptance would involve a deeper acknowledgement. I feel anxious, and I'm willing to allow this feeling to be here without needing it to change. I'm willing to welcome this feeling without needing it to change. So acceptance transforms our relationship with experience. It helps us cultivate patience. It helps us cultivate compassion and understanding. But we have to allow it just to be before we can engage in that process. Now, this distinction, I think, and I would suggest to you, between allowing and accepting, has profound implications for how we live our daily lives. Because when we practice both in that sequence, we cultivate a more peaceful and harmonious relationship with ourselves and with the world around us. And that includes all the people in our lives. So let's think about that for a moment, relationships. Allowing is giving others the space to be themselves without trying to control their behavior or emotions, knowing that we can't do it anyway. But allowing means we're not pushing back against letting people be who they are. But acceptance in relationships goes further, because it means actively embracing them as they are, strengths and weaknesses, warts and all, without wishing they were different. Now, I'm not talking here about tolerating harmful behavior. I'm not talking here about tolerating toxicity toward us, but I am talking about trying to approach others with compassion and understanding for their suffering. That's the active part. We embrace them as they are. Or what about when we face a challenge in our lives? Sorry, I'm muted because of the fire engine. It's we live on the main route for the Ridge Street fire station, so you hear that often. So in facing challenges, when life presents difficulties, allowing means acknowledging the reality of the situation without denial or suppression. We just allow it to bubble up. Acceptance is a deeper surrender to that challenge. So we let go of the why me? Why is this happening to poor me? We kind of pull the ego back from it and meet that challenge with, this is the active process, meet that challenge with courage, wisdom, and trust in the Dharma to get us through it. Or as I alluded to earlier in our meditation, allowing involves observing our thoughts, observing the bodily sensations, observing the emotions as they arise without interference.
Jeffrey, you're still muted.
Thank you. Sorry. So I don't know where I left off there. During practice in meditation, as I said earlier, allowing involves observing thoughts, sensations, or emotions as they arise without interference. We just let them be. Acceptance is the more active part. We bring a active sense of kindness and non-judgment to whatever's arising. And we recognize the whole package is just part of being human. It's part of the deal. It's how we relate to it that matters. Now, keeping in mind that in the twin pillars, if you will, the twin foundations of allowing and acceptance are wisdom and compassion, our good old friends, because wisdom helps us see clearly the impermanent and interdependent nature of all things, of all phenomena, reminding us again and again that if we resist this reality, it only creates suffering. And then on the other pillar, compassion allows us to hold ourselves, hold others with care and kindness, even and especially in the midst of pain or difficulty. So, for instance, when we accept the inevitability of aging, when we accept the inevitability of illness and death, we cultivate wisdom by aligning ourselves with the truth of impermanence. Oh, this is part of the deal with impermanence. But at the same time, we cultivate compassion. We respond to this truth with tenderness, with care for ourselves and all those others who suffer. Now, I think that the distinction between allowing and acceptance really reflects this journey, this practice journey itself. Allowing is the beginning of mindfulness. If we're not allowing stuff to come up without interference, our mindfulness is not there. It's not working because we need to learn to open to the present moment without resistance. Oh, anger is arising, frustrations arising, joys arising, sadness is arising, whatever is arising. Oh, a pain in my arm is arising, on and on. That is critical to get the process started. Then we move into acceptance, the culmination of the Buddhist path. We embrace reality with wisdom, with compassion, and importantly, with equanimity. When we cultivate both allowing and acceptance, we align ourselves with the teachings of the Dharma, and we move closer to reducing our suffering, at least that suffering over which we have some agency. In the words of the Buddha from the Dhammapada, he says, quote, "Let go of what is not yours. Letting go will bring you happiness and freedom." And what I think he's talking about there is allowing it first, and then with acceptance, the acceptance piece is letting go of what is not ours. Allowing and acceptance are two sides of this letting go. They're inextricably part of letting go. They teach us when we practice them to live with greater peace, with greater presence, and with an open heart. So there's some thoughts on distinguishing allowing and acceptance. Thanks to Don for bringing the question. I thought it was a good one, and let's talk about it. Let's see. They changed my thing here. Hold the line.